What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the Retro Movie Podcast, the podcast where everything is connected. I'm your host, Jacob Thompson, and joining me is my co-host, friend, and the person most likely to mooch off his neighbor's Wi-Fi, Alex Perkins. Perk, how you doing tonight?
I'm well, thanks. And no, I pay Xfinity my hard-earned money.
They don't deserve it.
No.
Sucks.
Although, we'll start off today's episode with a nice little hack. If you go to the Xfinity store, it is a breeze.
Okay.
As opposed to calling or going online, it's all awful and takes hours and hours. But when there's a Xfinity employee within throttling distance, they kind of have to be good. They have to do it. So like I went in there, I'm like, hey, I'm moving from here to here this day. And they're like, all right, see you later.
There we go. That's the pro strap for today on Jacob and Perk's Wi-Fi hacks.
Yep.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is the podcast where every week Perk and I review a movie connected to the last one we watched. If you like our show, we post pretty much every Friday on podcast services and YouTube. And if you like our show, tell your friends about it and come watch the movies with us. Last week, we finished up our Japanese anime film string with A Silent Voice. And now we're transitioning to Korean films for a bit. Our connection to get to this week's movie was the classic Bach was featured in the soundtrack of both A Silent Voice as well as Okja. And we just hop from Okja to Parasite with the director Bong Joon-ho. So, Parasite this week. Perk, why don't you intro it for us?
Yeah, all right. Parasite is a 2019 joint directed by the aforementioned Bong Joon-ho, starring, and I will do my best on names as usual, Song Kang-ho, Lee Sun-kyun, Cho Yo-jeong, and Choi Woo-sik.
There you go.
Gave it my best. And it features around a family of four, mother, father, son, and daughter, living in absolute squalor in the slums of... Is it established that it's Seoul?
I don't know if they ever say what city it's in, actually.
A big city in Korea. Yeah. And one by one, as they work their way into jobs working for an extremely wealthy family through shenanigans and underhand means. Couple fun facts about this one. The house that the Parks live in, the gorgeous house that most of the movie takes place in, was built entirely as a set for this movie. The set designer who put it together, they consulted an architect when Bong Joon-ho first came up with like an idea of what the house should look like, and the architect was like, "You're crazy. No one would ever have a house that looks like this."
Yeah, it's a nice house. I like it.
And then Ki-woo's job, the home tutor, the way that they get entry into this family, his vocation was chosen for no particular reason other than the fact that it's functionally the only way in Korea that two families of this giant wealth disparity would interact with each other. That's like the only way it could happen. So it was more a choice of necessity rather than, just picking and choosing.
Sure. Yeah, that's one thing I want to get into later is just us not fully not growing up in Korea, and we can glean some things about society there, but obviously not a ton. But anyway, I'll go to you first, Perk. You've seen this movie before, but what do you think of it on this rewatch?
It's great. It's uncomfortable to watch, and I gave it 5 stars. So that probably means if it were more comfortable for me, it'd be like 7 stars. So, it's in my mind, it's like the perfect thriller. I pretty much love everything about it. We can go a little more in depth, but just like 3 thumbs up for me.
Nice. For me, I'm very conflicted, and I'm excited to talk to you about this as we get into the review, because I think it's like, technically it's incredible, right? Acting's amazing. The directing, specifically like the shot composition, I think is outstanding. It's very well made. Just like, it's a good movie. Like on paper, it's a good movie. When I think about I've been thinking about this like all since I've seen it. I'm trying to think about how my personal beliefs and viewpoints intersect with this film, and I just don't know if I like the themes, and I don't really understand what Bong Joon was trying to say with this film. And I just don't know if I like it. Like, I think it's very good, but I just don't know if I personally like it as a film. But yeah, we'll get into that. But that's kind of where my sticking point is. But like I said, on the whole, like, just technically, like, yeah, the acting's phenomenal. I was locked in the entire time. Like, it's incredibly gripping. You understand this family very well, and their tactics are, like I said, underhanded but very like clever and smart. And it's like, that's kind of fun to see that work, but they're also hurting people along the way. So all that, and then yeah, like the twist in the middle was nuts. Absolutely, like, completely caught me off guard.
You mentioned the acting is great. I agree. Everyone's incredibly believable. Everyone in the film is like a perfect casting.
Yeah.
In my opinion. And yeah, like, there are some really challenging roles in here, and I think pretty much everyone does their job to a T. The strongest point for me in this film, considering it's a thriller,
yeah,
I think on many occasions throughout, it's like the most tense movie I've ever watched. Like, the way that, like, the string keeps getting pulled tighter and tighter, like taut as a bowstring, it's really incredible, and it's really well done. And yes, there are scenes that are clearly put in there to add tension, but they don't feel shoehorned or anything. It just feels like natural developments, and just the whole first half of the movie, you're feeling so uneasy, and then when things start to collapse, it doesn't really help from like a tension standpoint. You're still just like, something's gonna blow. So eventually something's gonna blow. And my oh my, do things blow. Yeah, just it's not a positive feeling, but the catharsis of the climax of the movie is so intense that it really just pays off, the 2 hours that you've spent on the edge of your seat, like teeth clacking and all that.
Yeah, so yeah, speaking of the tension, I think that I maybe got a little bit, my expectations were set improperly. I think it might have affected my experience. I was expecting this to be a lot bloodier and a lot more violent. And it was actually not as violent as I was expecting. So it wasn't as tense for me, because like, even when like the three of them are hiding under the table and the rich parents are like on the couch, I'm like, okay, like, even if they find them, they're not going to like kill them. Like, they're not going to like kill these people. But when I thought things were going to really ramp is when the basement gets revealed and we're going to the basement and the old maid screaming for her husband. I'm like, oh, is he like locked up down there? Like, did this rich family have like this fucked up thing where they have this poor person down there? And it's like, no, that's just another thing that's going on that is very interesting. But I thought it was going to take a very sinister turn in that sense. And I don't know, I guess just seeing like Old Boy recently, which is like extremely violent and fucked up, like this was pretty tame by comparison. And also just like what you said is the most stressful movie for you to watch. For me, it's like it's Uncut Gems still. Like, that movie,
yeah, that's fair.
It's just that movie broke my scale for like anxiety. So yeah, and like, yeah, I think the climax is good, but also I'm just like, how did the son not die? Like, are you kidding me? Like, he got bashed in the head twice with that massive rock and he lives. Like, that was a little bit, I don't know. But I did like the ending of the dad having to go back in the basement, and then like the unclear ending of, will the son actually buy the house? Probably not. But yeah, so I think my expectations of it being a lot more like twisted kind of undercut it a little bit. And it wasn't as bad as I was expecting.
I could see that. I think maybe you're conflating violence with tension in potentially an unfair way. Because I mean, there's more tension in this movie than a bunch of the Tarantino movies, which are just blood action fests.
That's true.
And maybe it's to do with the structure, because the way that the first half of the movie develops. You're already working off of a lie, and then every time someone gets added, you're just building onto that and just adding on to the lie and just building up this house of cards that inevitably will collapse.
Yeah.
Which very effective for me, although I can see where if you misconstrued that it was just going to be like action through and through. Yeah, well, I can see like.
And to be clear, sorry. I did think it was going to be more violent. I think like it would be more twisted, I guess is probably better to say. Like the rich family isn't like evil. They're just like rich and they're oblivious and they're, privileged. They're not like so they don't have someone locked up in their basement intentionally. And that's where I was kind of expecting it to go when we're going down those stairs. I'm like, oh, this is going to get really fucked up now. And it's like incredibly like sad. And it speaks more of the desperation of these people. But it's hard for me to say like the rich family is like the villain of the film because they aren't really. They're just kind of assholes. You know what I mean?
So you hit the nail on the head, and that's the point. Because if it does take a twist down a dark road and like maybe they do have someone locked up in the basement, that ruins the film, in my opinion, because we've been there. We've done that so many times.
Yeah.
One of the most effective parts of this movie is what you just said. For me, it's that the rich family who are posed where the antagonist would be are not, they're not bad people. They're misguided. They don't know how to relate to the, poor family. But they're not innately evil. They're living within their privilege and their worldview is very small. So that's what I think makes them a really effective, like almost character foil for the main character family, is because, you want to root for the protagonists, right? But the protagonists are kind of weaseling their way in and taking advantage of a family who, they're rich, but that doesn't mean they're bad. So it plays with roles a little bit like that, and that's something I think is really effective, because if it turns out that the rich family are some big bads, like Get Out, as an example, well, then it's like Get Out.
Yeah, and yeah. So, and I'm not trying to say that it should have been that, but this gets to my issue with the film as far as the themes. So like, what is the message this film is trying to send, right? Because to me, it's almost like it's sending the message of desperate people will do anything to help themselves, and they won't help other people. They're very selfish. But then it's like, okay, don't be poor, and it's like I don't think that's the message you want to say, but that's the kind of message I got. It's like, oh, well, don't be poor then, because then you're gonna be desperate and do bad shit. Like, there's no counter argument in this movie against the situation we see with the family, right? And when you do like a classist setting, which I think is very interesting and very relevant in today's day and age, I'm not saying like the rich family has to be the bad guys or evil, but like we didn't get to see how the family got to the situation they're at. And, I would assume it's systemic issues, but there's no talk of systemic issues. It's just like we meet them where they're already desperate, and then they do things that, I don't know. I don't think
you're doing that thing again. How can I believe that these characters are friends when I didn't see when they met when they were 6?
I'm not trying to do that. I'm just saying that these aren't good people. Like the family, I don't think are good people. Like we get that scene where they're getting drunk in the living room, right? And they're talking about the mom is talking about, oh, like if I was rich, I'd be nice, and then immediately pushes the dog, and it's like, I think that's indicating no, you wouldn't. Like you'd be not great even if you were rich. And pretty much, I think all of the characters do something that they didn't have to do. That's like bad, I guess, for lack of a better term. Like the son, even though his friend who helped him get the job is like, hey, I have a crush on this girl, protect her for me. He immediately starts dating her, right? The daughter, I thought of this last night, but now I'm blanking on it. Anyway, they all like go a little bit too far, and they could have just, had their situation and maybe, just done it, but they do a little bit the one thing too much. And so like I think it feels to me like the family are like, they're not like evil, but they're not great people either. So it's hard to like root for them completely, if that makes sense. So again, I just go back to like, what's the message of this film? You know, and that's where I feel like I'm crazy because I'm like, everyone loves this movie. I'm like, but doesn't it have like a negative message? I don't know. What do you think the themes are?
So obviously the differentiation in class is the big one. And I think part of it, obviously we're looking at this family, and you're right, they're not the good guys, and basically what we're seeing is desperation. Like what happens when you're backed into a corner? You know, you fight with no rules. You hit below the belt, and that's kind of what they're doing. They think they're all the way backed into a corner in the squalor that they're living in, and they form this plan. And once you've got a foothold, they just kind of keep taking advantage of it through greed and, yeah, you're right, selfishness. And I think selfishness actually it's shown the other way around too. You see how everyone is kind of self-serving in a way, because you've got this family that's pulling off this huge charade because they want to do better for themselves financially. But then you've also got the wealthy family who are only concerned with themselves, which is emphasized with a really great moment in the climactic scene where the sister, I'm gonna look it up, make sure I get the name right.
Ki Jung.
Yes, Ki Jung gets stabbed in the middle of the yard and is legitimately bleeding out from a stab wound. And the son of the rich family just has a seizure, which kids have. And instead of tending to the active life or death scenario, it's like, no, leave her. She's just the help. Like I think they literally step over her on the way to pick up, the rich kid and take him. So I think a lot of the movie revolves around selfishness and just showing that, no matter where you're at on the pole, you're out for number one most of the time.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a really like important scene and good scene, but I'm not trying to be an apologist for the rich family, but also like they don't know they're all family members. They don't know that when the driver, the dad, is like trying to help her, they don't know that's her daughter, that's his daughter. I'm not saying they should have been like, hey, come drive me to the hospital instead of helping that woman. I'm not sure it would have made a difference. But even when we're talking about how they're treating the Parks, they don't know they're poor even. Like they can maybe assume that the son is, but the daughter they probably assume isn't. She's like a well-respected art therapy instructor, and even the driver is well-respected. Like, so it's hard to, because it's not like they're actively being mean to poor people that they know are poor. It's like the help, which like, yeah, they're still shit. I'm not trying to apologize for them, but we have more information than the rich family does. And so when we see them do shitty things, we're like, oh, why would you do that? It's like, but they don't know everything we know. So it's a little bit skewed,
Jacob, I don't care if it's my daughter who got stabbed in the middle of the field or some random woman. You helped the woman who got stabbed.
I know, but they established the kid only had 15 minutes to live previously.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's witch magic, but it's showing that they still think of all these people as the other.
Yeah,
these people I agree with that. All below them.
Yeah,
and that's what it's trying to emphasize.
Yeah. So bring it back then. So what do you feel like is the theme of this movie? What message was Bong Joon-ho trying to send here?
I think it's just like a cautionary tale on all fronts. Like, people, you got to respect people even if they're not of your standing, and that goes in both directions. It's the class disparity is like the clear central theme. It's just kind of painting a picture of how different things can be. And yeah, I think mainly just self-servience, or what is it? that's not the word, but self-interest being number one, and inconsideration, and I mean they literally the protagonist family kills a woman to just further themselves, essentially. Mm-hmm. It's all about what people are willing to do for themselves at the cost of others.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, maybe it is just like, don't be selfish, I guess. But yeah, it just I feel like their selfishness, while frequent, didn't directly lead to their downfall. I mean, you could argue the mistake they made was letting in the old housekeeper, right? If they never let her in, everything would have been fine, theoretically. We don't know what it would happen. Like, that was the moment. And that was, you would argue, is not selfish. They let this woman in who they had no right to help, and they let her in anyway. And then that led to everything bad happening. So I don't know. But like, one of my favorite conversation in the movie is when they're on the couch drinking, and I think the dad is like, do you think the old driver is okay? Like, he got a job? And, you know, the son's like, oh, he's probably fine. And then the daughter's like, why do you care about him? Care about us, right? Like, that's the turning point where things start to go downhill. Like, that's the most important conversation in the movie. And I think it does emphasize what you're saying about selfishness. Another moment like that is when their house is flooding, and they're like walking through the street trying to get back to their house, and one of their neighbors like, hey, can you help me like get this? And he's like, and they just keep walking. That's a very rough situation, but we see moments where they act with pure self-interest. But I don't know if there's enough like direct ties to their comeuppance, if that makes sense. And maybe I just like things where it's more clear and straightforward, but and I'll just reiterate again, I'm not saying it's a bad movie. I'm just saying, for me personally, it's not how I typically like classist like commentaries to go, because I feel like there's no like positive or hopeful message at this. It's just like, oh well, that sucked for everybody.
Yeah, I think that's also part of the point. It doesn't get wrapped up with a bow.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And this is where I mentioned previously, of like, we don't know like Korean class structure, because we're from America. I would infer based on this movie that it's even more disparate than in America, or maybe it's equally disparate but more close up.
Maybe, yeah.
So yeah, I just don't know, but
that's fair. You mentioned a scene briefly, which I want to touch on because it's my favorite scene in the movie, and I think one of the coolest ways that the movie emphasizes the disparity between classes is when they're all partying at the rich people's house, and obviously the rich people come home because of the rain.
Yeah,
that whole scene, just the setting and the ambiance is gorgeous, and you've just got like the beautiful rainfall outside. And then when they sneak out in the night, and there's an extended scene of them, walking back to their place, as we, literally descend down into the slums, figuratively descending through the classes. This beautiful, life-giving rain is transformed into a horror, a flood, a monsoon, the destruction of all. So I just think that scene is really cool and really effective at showing what perspective can bring to things. And then especially when they get back to their house and you just see like quite literal rock bottom, the toilet exploding and like water up to their neck in their home. And I think that's, another turning point, because that, you're right, that's when things had started to go awry and we're, winding the crank nearing the end. But I really liked that scene. I like the way that it's, metaphorical and literal descending, and the way that we kind of transition like a gradient from like, a nice light rain to death and destruction.
Yeah. Yeah. I mentioned before, like the shot composition is just incredible in this film. Before that, like you're saying, just everything with like the window looking out onto the lawn is just gorgeous. how they shot. Yeah, the flood scene is amazing. And even before that, there are scenes where they're in their home talking about money and like the stone is behind them, just kind of always around. And then you could argue it's a little bit cheesy, but I liked it when we end the flood scene, the water, we like go down into the water and then the water line is used as a transition, as a wipe to like move up into like the overhead shot.
I think that stuff's cool.
Yeah. It was really cool. And like I said, on paper, this film's amazing. I just have personal problems because I'm a little complainy boy.
I mean, and that's fair. I mean, that's literally what last week I said something similar where I think A Silent Voice, was that last week?
Mm-hmm.
Silent Voice. A Silent Voice might be a masterpiece, but I didn't like it. It's to each their own. I see where you're coming from.
Yeah. I was thinking of recommendations. I was thinking about Squid Game a lot afterwards, like comparing Squid Game to this, because another Korean project that is about classism and desperation. So I think it'd be a good piece to watch along this if you somehow haven't seen it. But I was thinking about the protagonist of Squid Game and like the difference between him and the Park family, and it's that I feel like he's easy to root for because he goes out of his way to never fuck anybody over, and that's not the case in this film. So yeah, just interesting comparison, but that'd be a good one to watch if you haven't seen it somehow.
Yeah, I think at the start of Squid Game he's doing that.
I mean, once he gets to the games, he doesn't. But yeah,
right.
I mean, he's gambling and doing shit beforehand. But once he gets there, then he helps his fellow people.
He's definitely more of a character to root for. That's for sure.
Yeah, and I've talked about before in this podcast of like I feel like I always need like a character to root for, and this movie is kind of devoid of that. I mean, I root for the family to some extent, but then there's certain things they do. I'm like, can't fully sign off on that. But anyway, any recommendations on your end?
No, I don't think so. I mean, structurally, it's kind of one of a kind. Thematically, you're right. There's like classism is touched on a lot. I like that the rich family are not painted as evil, because oftentimes that's the case in class critiques. Is it's just rich people bad. It's like, nah, they're just rich.
Yeah.
So yeah. But yeah, other Bong Joon-ho films, they're equally bleak. I've only seen Okja and Snowpiercer, both really good, but again, like Bong Joon-ho, fantastic filmmaker. It's not often very enjoyable to watch his movies.
Man needs a hug.
Yeah.
I misspoke. I was calling the family the Park family. That's the rich family. The
right.
Park family is the Kims.
Kim family. Yep.
One last thing. One thing I'm surprised we did not get a full payoff on was the rich dad not loving his wife, or maybe he does. I feel like there was going to be some sort of twist or something there, and we didn't really get it. And I was surprised that we didn't get a payoff to that. I wonder if that maybe was like a lost in translation thing.
It could have been. I feel like it was kind of just, I don't know, more playful. You could argue that it's insinuated that he might be on, off on business trips, gallivanting about and sleeping around, but I don't know. I think they hold off on doing that in an effort to once again like not let you pigeonhole these people as villains.
Right.
Same thing with like we're pretty much always get to see him being pretty much a good dad, and the mom who's maybe a little slow but a very concerned parent.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think maybe they could have elaborated on that a little more. But I think it's more just like, yeah, if they had gone deeper into that, like tugged at it a little bit, you can start to paint him as an actual villain rather than just like the antagonist.
Right.
And they antagonist not used in like an evil sense, just like against the protagonist.
Yeah. Opposition. Yeah. And yeah, they're probably using those lines to iterate the point where he was saying where he's like the driver almost crosses the line, but he doesn't.
Oh yeah,
that's probably what it was. But it was weird. Like the first time he was asked if he loves his wife, he was like, "We'll call it love," and I was like, interesting. But anyway, just a little thing I noticed.
Fair enough.
All right, well, that is our review of Parasite. I hope I don't get flamed in the comments, but if I do, that's fine.
If anyone comes at you, I'll beat them up.
Oh, thank you, Perk.
People are entitled to their opinions.
Before I reveal what we're watching next week, I have a quick little anime recap. The new season started, so I checked out a few of the new shows that caught my attention. I tried out 3 of them. The first one I tried is called Bullbuster. Perk, what do you think Bullbuster's about?
Bull with a U?
Mm-hmm.
Matadors?
Couldn't be farther off. It's about, of course, it's about a small company that has mechs they use for insect extermination.
Of course.
But the insects have gotten bigger. Now there's like giant naked mole rats that are like fighting and destroying an island. Anyway, it's supposed to be like a workplace comedy meets mecha anime. And I'm like, that could be kind of fun. And I watched first episode. I'm just like, no, it's not doing it for me. Animation's not great in the action. And I'm just like, yeah, we're dropping that one. So Bullbuster's out. Second one I tried is Daigo, Firefighter in Orange. What do you think that one's about, Perk?
Surely this one's about a firefighter.
You nailed it.
Yeah,
a firefighting anime. It's not great. I'd give it like a B, but it is very educational. So I'm going to keep watching it. I've learned a lot about firefighting, and it's like the equipment. They like every time there's a new piece of equipment introduced, they like have a little like notes about it. I'm like, oh, that's kind of fun. And it's specifically around like a team that does like rescue, like search and rescue. And during fires, I'm like, you know what? I'll watch this just to learn some things, even though it's like incredibly slow pacing and the characters are just like super generic. But yeah, it's fun enough. And then the last one I watched, which was the hot commodity this season, and my God, people write about it. So this is called Frieren Beyond Journey's End. Perk, you played D&D.
Mm-hmm.
You've watched Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
So this is set in a typical kind of fantasy world, and it starts off with the titular party of heroes. You know, you got your hero, you got your mage, your warrior, and your priest, I guess. And the show starts right after they defeated the Demon King. Like they just completed their campaign essentially, and the show centers around the mage, who's an elf, and so she lives for thousands of years, but everyone else in her party is like a human or a dwarf, so they're going to die within like 100 years or whatever. And so to them, they're like, oh, that was such a great adventure. Like I made so many memories. She's like, 10 years. It was a 10-year adventure. That's like 100th of my lifespan. Like this is like nothing to me. And then the like hero of the party passes away 50 years later. And she kind of has this moment of like, I barely knew him. And she wants to like change herself, become more caring and care more about people and learn more about herself. So the story follows her after the events of this and just kind of going around this fantasy world and kind of doing small quests for people and helping out people and kind of learning more about herself and others. And it's amazing. It's a gorgeous, beautiful anime. It's very chill and cozy, but also has some really, really cool action moments and some really like surprisingly hype moments. And she takes on an apprentice and all this and things happen. But I'm absolutely loving it so far. I think it's a really cool idea for an anime. It's a typical kind of fantasy setting, but it works well. And it's fun to hang out in. And yeah, I think if you're a fan of fantasy or D&D or Lord of the Rings, anything like that, I'd highly recommend it. I think it's a very, very cool show.
Nice.
So yeah, that's my seasonal recap. And I'm gonna try to do it every season. I like to stay up to date with that stuff, but there's a shit ton of anime, so
yeah, there's
can only watch so much.
That's for sure.
But all right, well, that is our show for this week. Next week, we're going to be following, get her name, the mom from Parasite, Lee Jong-un, to a film called A Taxi Driver. Not Taxi Driver, the Scorsese pick. This is A Taxi Driver. It is streaming on Amazon Prime. So So, yeah.
Also not a Taxi Driver, the 1950s Indian movie.
That is correct. This is, I think, 2017. Yeah. So, yeah. A Taxi Driver on Prime. But until then, thanks for watching. Bye.
Bye-bye.